Ankelium Down, written by Nik Hein, narrated with the help of the AI.
Chapter 9. A few more blasts from the aliens' energy weapons slammed into the wall, melting the cladding as they struck. The plastic panels didn't ignite, but smoke and a sharp, acrid stench filled the air. After his first glimpse of the alien, Dams ducked behind the corner and didn't dare peek out again. Firing blind from cover felt like a waste. Ammunition was scarce, and he couldn't squander it. No sound betrayed the aliens' approach. Judging by their bulk and equipment, the aliens had to outweigh the average human by a fair margin. Yet what did Dams know about their gait? For all that mass, they might still move softly and silently. If human soldiers could pull off that trick, why not aliens? He glanced at Niels. The overseer lay behind the opposite corner, moving sluggishly. From where Dams crouched, he couldn't see the man's injured leg, only that there seemed to be no blood. He allowed himself a crooked grin. That guard back in the prison block and the dead slaves in their pens hadn't bled either. The scorched holes in the chest or skull did the job well enough. At least Niels was alive. Now Dams needed a way out of the trap and fast. The alien would probably waste no time closing in. Dams in its place wouldn't. It had the firepower edge, and its armor was clearly superior to a thin prison jumpsuit. Worst case, it would lob a grenade onto the corridor junction. Dams's nerves stretched taut as wire. Another heartbeat or two, and everything would end. But the situation was resolved in a way he never expected. A metallic clang and grinding roar rolled down the passageway. The crash of an emergency bulkhead slamming into place, followed by a hollow boom as locking bolts engaged. Then silence dropped, broken only by the similar sounds rippling outward like echoes. One after another, in adjacent corridors, massive armored plates sealed the passages. Dams stayed frozen for a moment, then darted a glance around the corner. Through swirling smoke, he saw that the corridor had become a dead end. The alien was trapped on the far side of the bulkhead. Dams knew opening it would be no small feat. Emergency protocols made it impossible to quickly unlock a freshly triggered bulkhead. The designers figured this helped curb rash decisions during shipboard panic. He'd never had to test that theory before, but right now, it played right into his hands. Eric lay by the wall, twitching weakly as he regained consciousness. Apparently, the alien hadn't bothered wasting ammo on him, having rightly judged Dams the real threat. Keeping the young overseer in his sights, Dams hooked the makeshift metal club with his boot and kicked it well out of Eric's reach. "Don't shoot," Niels's voice called out. "Please, don't shoot. We can still pull him out." Dams turned, stunned. He'd been sure that after a hit from the alien's plasma weapon, Niels was a write-off. No one stays mobile, no one even stays functional, with a fist-sized hole burned through the thigh. In fact, Dams had already all but decided, without quite framing the thought, that he would have to go on alone. A dazed, possibly mind-controlled Eric and a gravely wounded Niels would slow him to a crawl. Out here, where at any moment you could blunder into a pack of berserk Ankelium zombies, or an alien patrol, dragging that kind of ballast meant zero chance of breaking through. Yet Niels was on his feet, leaning against the bulkhead, looking remarkably steady and composed for someone with a shot-through leg. There was no trace of shock on his face. He wasn't even wincing. Only then did Dams notice the absence of that sickening smell of charred flesh and drop his gaze to the overseer's thigh. The charge had struck closer to the outer side of the thigh. Had the limb been ordinary flesh, the quadriceps would be mangled, and Niels would be sprawled on the deck, pale and drenched in cold sweat. If only. Evidently, the main drive cables of his biomechanical prosthesis ran along the inner thigh, while the load-bearing struts were forged from an alloy that a glancing plasma bolt, or whatever it was, barely phased. Plastic, wiring, and other minor components had fused into a solid crust along the wound path, and with every move, Dams could see clear through the hole to the bulkhead and deck behind Niels. "Don't worry, it's only a leg," Niels said. "The rest of me is all warm and fleshy. Some neuroconnectors are fried, but the prosthesis is more or less responsive, for now, which means we have to move." Dams looked at the huge slab of the emergency bulkhead. Sooner or later, the aliens would cut through it or override the locks. Niels was right. But where to go? "Is your comm still intact?" he asked. "We'll have to recheck the map. That," he nodded toward the bulkhead, "was our route to the objective. Now we need a detour, and I heard other passages seal off. Let's hope the way isn't blocked completely." "Map's not much use," Niels muttered, fishing out the tablet. "It's offline. We can't risk plugging into the ship's net, assuming it's even up. The aliens would trace us in a heartbeat." "No choice," Dams replied. "We work with what we have. But what triggered this? Some defense protocol?" "Doesn't look like it," Niels said, spreading the schematic of the galley across the screen. "More like a glitch. Emergency systems should seal compartments section by section, and I can see." He gestured down the corridor that ran perpendicular to the blocked one. "That way's open for at least another section." Dams took 2 steps to the junction and peered around the corner. Sure enough, before it dog-legged away, the corridor crossed several more junctions, and between 2 of them, he glimpsed part of the galley's main structural frame. On a passenger liner that would be hidden behind decor panels, but on a migrant ark repurposed for slave transport, niceties like interior finish weren't high on the list. "So that way then?" Dams asked. Niels shook his head. "Not sure, buddy. The gallery runs parallel to the red zone without entering it, and it's in the wrong direction. We'd be moving away from the target. Besides, we don't know where else the passages are sealed." Dams looked around. The opposite direction was a mystery. 10 meters down, the corridor bent away and blocked any further view. He hated the thought of retreating. But if that was the only way around the sealed zone...
"Fall back 1 junction and turn right."
The voice made Niels jerk so hard he nearly dropped his communicator. Whatever he claimed, that crippled prosthesis was clearly running at less than full power.
"Do you read me? We don't have much time."
In 2 long strides, Dams was beside the senior overseer, who now held the device at arm's length as if the screen had suddenly sprouted venomous fangs. Dams weren't sure what species that insect might be, but the poison part felt dead on. He'd recognized the speaker's voice even before the face flickered into view on the little display. "How did he get through to us?" Dams hissed. Niels shook his head, bewildered. I don't know. I disabled the network interface. Too dangerous? I don't get it."
"We don't have time to play guess."
The curator snapped. His image was almost monochrome, writhing with static, but there was no doubting who it was. The one and only member of the Imperial genetic clan aboard the galley.
"I've kept my private net in reserve until now, but they'll pinpoint it soon. Move."
Dams hesitated only a few seconds. To be honest, what did they have to lose? He trusted the curator, as shady as the man's dealings were, Imperial bloodline or not, about as far as he could throw him. But the alternative was the aliens, and there were no good chances with them whatsoever. "Fine," he said, looking back. Eric was already on his feet, swaying, one hand on the wall for balance, but his eyes were clear. "I'll keep an eye on him," Dams told Niels. "Can you manage on your own?" "Drunk crab style? Yes," Niels answered with a humorless grin. "But fast enough."
"Time,"
the curator said. Frustration and desperation were plain, even through the communicator's tinny speaker.
Move out.
Dams nodded to the senior overseer, who hobbled off in the direction the curator had given, glancing at the screen every few steps. Dams waited for the dazed Eric to move out, then followed, rifle at the ready. Who knew what kind of mind control tricks the aliens had? Niels had convinced him to bring the kid along, but Dams wasn't about to let a potentially pre-programmed man stay at his back. At the junction the curator had designated, they discovered they had no choice. The passages to the left and straight ahead were already sealed by emergency bulkheads.
Captain Kalau.
The curator's voice burst from the communicator. Dams flinched. He hadn't been called by his military rank since the sentence was read at the closed court-martial. He'd almost forgotten the sound of his own last name, let alone his rank. Captain Dams Kalau, Task Force L-18, Imperial Special Operations. Now, it felt like a string of magic words from the space opera novels he'd devoured as a kid.
Keep moving, but listen. The aliens could jam my net at any moment. I installed it on the galley for other purposes, and it probably won't. Never mind. The point is, it allowed me to turn Overseer Sigurdsson's communicator and contact you remotely.
Overseer Sigurdsson, Niels, turned toward Dams and held the communicator high enough for him to see the screen. From 10 paces, the curator's face looked like a tiny cartoon avatar, the supervillain of a children's holo serial explaining how the heroes could escape, or steering them into a very clever trap.
I've uploaded a map of every sealed emergency bulkhead.
The curator went on.
I've timed it so the open corridors guide you here before the aliens figure out how to take back the system. It's decentralized, and I've slagged several control nodes. Under no circumstances stop. The bulkheads are on timers and will close behind you as you move. I can't cancel them. My access to the emergency network is limited. If you hesitate, the door will slam in your face and strand you until the aliens cut through from their side. I did not expend all this effort so that...
He broke off abruptly.
I'm counting on you, Captain Kalau.
The image stuttered, flickered, and vanished. In its place, a schematic of this section of the galley lit up. A pale gray maze of passages and compartments, with red marks for every shut bulkhead and a bright yellow thread of safe passage snaking between them. He's steering us roughly where we were headed, Niels said, studying it. Just with a wider detour. The route crosses several captured zones, but it looks like every side corridor and service hatch leading to it is sealed. How did he... He never finished. Alarm beacons flared crimson along the ceiling, and Eric had to lurch forward as a massive bulkhead slid out of the wall and slammed shut behind him. "Move!" Dams snapped, waving him on. Niels shot him a doubtful look. Dams shrugged. "We can't stay here. We play by his rules and keep moving, or we'll end up tin-canned until the aliens arrive with a giant can opener." "Niels!" Eric cried, apparently noticing the overseer's leg for the first time. "How are you even... Are you all right? Is there a single damn thing on this blasted galley that's all right?" Niels replied, then limped down the corridor. They moved as fast as Niels's crippled prosthesis and Eric's scrambled coordination would allow. Eric, being knocked out twice in the past half hour, thrice, if you counted the alien's mental strike, was doing worse than the senior overseer. More than once, Dams felt the urge to break into a jog, to push their pace, but he quelled the impulse. His companions were already running on fumes. Overseers on the galleys were trained in riot suppression protocols, sure, yet no one expected them to endure the stress of real combat. The fact that they were still more or less functional was almost a miracle already. Dams had seen the toughest, highly trained men snap like twigs the first time they faced the brutal simplicity of battle: run and kill or be killed. He'd never found it surprising or shameful. Everyone has a role, a thing they're trained to do best. Put him in charge of a wedding reception or a symphony orchestra, and he'd probably freeze just as badly. Here, despite the sheer absurdity of the situation and mortal danger, he felt exactly where he belonged. He only needed to set the right priorities. Niels and Eric weren't teammates. They were civilians he had to shepherd out of a hot zone. That much he understood, and few in the Empire could do it better. Granted, the variables were legion, timed bulkheads, alien soldiers, packs of Ankelium zombies roaming the decks, and the curator himself. But first, survive and keep the civilians alive. So far, everything has been relatively smooth. The curator's mysterious private comm network had indeed carved them a safe corridor. The Imperial relative went totally dark, either wary of alien tracebacks or already jammed. But for now, they needed no new instructions. They didn't even have to consult the downloaded map. The bulkheads had sealed every route except a single path, the one the curator swore led straight to his refuge. The lingering question was what they would do once they actually got there. Dams knew the aliens could, if they wished, comb through every nook of the galley and punch through any obstacle. They would break the ship into search sectors and clear them one by one, leaving sensor beacons in their wake. He had led boarding teams that did exactly the same on hostile ships and stations, and he saw no reason alien assault squads would act differently. Of course, every galley carried lifeboats and escape pods, but those were flimsy cans meant only to keep survivors breathing until rescue arrived. With the ship now drifting somewhere between Venus and Earth, with all comms surely gutted, launching an escape pod would be suicide on a delay fuse. And that assumed the aliens didn't track the launch and fish them out of a vacuum like shrimp from a restaurant tank. That problem could wait. Right now, the goal was to reach a spot where packs of crazed slaves or stray plasma bolts didn't loom every second. Then, they could pause and think. Still, surprises found them. Dams had noticed that the bulkhead timers were set to give them a modest head start, without forcing a dead run. Even with two half-crippled companions, they stayed comfortably ahead of the closing wave, the thuds of armored panels fading behind them, blocking the aliens' possible pursuit parties. Niels and Eric allowed themselves to relax, and Dams was about to follow suit when the ambush hit. This pack was smaller than the one near the backup reactor, but no less savage. The Ankelium zombies didn't burst from vents. The fugitives' route twisted on a logic known only to the curator, and as they swung around yet another corner, they ran nose to nose with former slaves reshaped into living weapons. It ended fast. As before, the fugitives were saved only because the slaves, creatures who had spent nearly their entire existence in work pods or sleep pens, were never built for real combat. Even Niels and Eric managed to shove their attackers back, and when Dams waded in, the fight was done in seconds. He didn't burn a single flechette round. "Everyone all right?" he asked, eyeing 8 bodies on the deck. Judging by their condition, these slaves were from a batch already at its wear-out limit. Even by galley standards, their muscles were severely wasted. Without the aliens' implants, they'd hardly have moved at all, let alone that fast. "I'm fine, kind of," Niels grunted, rubbing his neck. Eric nodded. "Good thing the aliens zombify those amoebas and not real men. One of them grabbed me neat enough, but he had the strength of half a cough." A dull boom rang behind them as another bulkhead clanged shut, and the overseer glanced back, uneasy. "We ought to keep moving." He checked the map. "We're almost at the curator's quarters." Walking on, Dams mulled the encounter. How had reprogrammed slaves ended up in a supposedly safe corridor? Were they trapped in it when the locks fell? Or had they broken in later? The bulkheads should have walled off the vent trunks too, unless the curator's rewiring left gaps. And if the curator knew they were there, why no warning? Dams obeyed the man's rules, but he didn't put much stock in the Imperial relative. What exactly did the remark about not wanting all the effort to be wasted mean? He nearly pinned the thought when they swung another corner and hit a blank wall. Bastard! Eric lunged at the shut bulkhead, hammering it with his fist. Damn it! All for nothing! He struck the cold, hard metal again and again. Niels checked the communicator. We're at the spot, he said. The map says this is the last passage. Beyond it is the VIP sector, the Imperial Suites. It's supposed to be open. Imperial rat! Eric snarled, half in tears. He led us here just to mock us.
Careful, young man.
The curator's voice suddenly came from a wall speaker.
Insulting Imperial kin is technically a mid-grade offense. Under the circumstances, I'll pretend I heard nothing. I'm pleased you reached me.
Armored doors shuddered and slid apart, revealing a short passage that ended some distance away in another bulkhead.
Don't hang around down there,
the curator urged.
We still have a small margin before the invaders breach my fortress, and we must use it to plan.
All three stepped inside. The door behind them slid shut, but the far one didn't open. What the hell? Niels muttered. Dams frowned. This corridor was nothing like the ones they had followed out of alien-held territory. Different cross-section, standard military cladding he'd seen on dozens of warships, no extra fittings except a small terminal by each hatch and a square ceiling hatch near the far door. It was so familiar. It's an airlock, he said. Niels and Eric stared. Niels checked the map again. The nearest docking bay or service airlock should be way off. I know every lock on this tin can, and they look nothing like this. Dams shook his head. I've seen this type. It's definitely an airlock. That, he pointed at the far door, is an inner hatch. How do you know? Eric demanded. Maybe he brought us here to vent us out into a vacuum. He loaded the map, remember? Niels stared at his slate in horror, but Dams pointed at the ceiling panel. Military standard, mostly on small raiders. Both doors seal, and the intruder is trapped. They used to mount the gun on the wall. Later, they put it in the ceiling. What in blazes are you babbling about? Niels snapped. The ceiling hatch parted. With a whisper of servos, a device descended, impossible to mistake. A twin-barreled assault cannon, armored shield in front. The muzzles jerked and locked dead center on Dams.
Captain Kalau,
came the curator's calm voice.
I'd rather not complicate an already tense situation. Please place your weapon on the deck and step forward. Otherwise, you'll all be staying in the lock under the turret's aim.